She thought she was moving into a quiet apartment. Cheap rent, city views, a fresh start. But what Emma found was a secret buried behind the walls, one that had been waiting in the dark for over 20 years. From eerie knocks in the night to fogged mirrors that wrote messages on their own, her life turned into a nightmare she couldn't explain. Until she found the hidden door and what was trapped behind it. What happened inside this apartment isn't just a ghost story. It's a cry for help from a child who was never heard. Until now. Imagine moving into a new apartment. Affordable, a little old, but nothing you can't handle. You unpack your things, start settling in, and then it begins. A soft knock from inside the wall. At first, Emma thought it was just the pipes, maybe a neighbor. But the sounds grew louder, stranger. Items began disappearing and reappearing in impossible places. Her mirror fogged up with messages written by unseen hands. And always, the knocking. Until she found the hidden door behind her bedroom wall and discovered a small sealed-off room that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. Inside was a child's bed, toys frozen in time, and a name, Lucy. In Paranormal Events in Small Apartments, you'll follow Emma's chilling journey from curiosity to terror as she uncovers the heartbreaking truth of what really happened in Apartment 3A. What begins as a classic haunting unravels into a story about silence, guilt, and a little girl lost in the cracks of time. This isn't just about ghosts. It's about the pain that lingers, the secrets we bury, and the voices that refuse to be forgotten. And in the end, it's about redemption, too. If you've ever felt a cold draft when there shouldn't be one, if you've ever heard footsteps when you were alone, this story is going to stick with you long after it ends. The first thing Emma noticed about the apartment was how quiet it was. Not peaceful, too quiet, like the building was holding its breath. It sat at the far end of a narrow street, tucked between a boarded-up antique shop and a shuttered bakery. The bricks were chipped and dark with age, the windows a little cloudy, like old glasses that had seen too many rainy days. The building had 5 floors, and her unit was on the 3rd, a one-bedroom apartment with a narrow balcony, small kitchen, and wooden floors that creaked with every step. The rent was low. Suspiciously low, Emma told herself it was a lucky find. After all, she was new to the city, and she couldn't afford to be picky. Her old life, her tiny hometown, the failed engagement, the parents who wanted her to be someone else, was behind her now. She'd landed a job at a creative agency downtown, the kind of place with beanbags in the break room and kombucha on tap. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to begin again, to live her own story. Still, something about the building made her feel watched. The landlord, Mr. O'Connor, met her at the front door the morning she moved in. He was a wiry man in his 70s, with sunken eyes and a strange way of smiling like it hurt. His keys jingled as he fumbled to unlock the main entrance. "You're in 3B, he said, his voice dry as paper. "Stairs only. Elevator's been dead since '97. Hope you don't mind." "No problem," Emma replied cheerfully, gripping the handle of her suitcase. She didn't want to seem nervous, though her stomach was tied in knots. As they climbed the stairs, she noticed the air grew colder with each floor. The paint on the walls peeled like sunburned skin, and the hallway lights flickered in and out, as though trying to make up their minds. Mr. O'Connor moved slowly, dragging his feet like he knew this building better than he wanted to. When they reached her floor, he paused and pointed down the dim hallway. 3B's at the end, on the left. 3A is empty. 3C is Mrs. Chen. She minds her own business. Just one thing. He hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "There's a storage room next to your unit. Don't bother trying the door. It stays locked. Always has." Emma raised an eyebrow. Storage? That's right, just old junk from before my time. Pipes run behind the wall, too, so you might hear some knocking or creaking. Don't worry about it. She nodded, but the way he said it, "Don't worry about it," sent a small chill crawling up her spine. Inside, the apartment was smaller than she expected, but cozy. The walls were yellowed from age, the window in the living room slightly warped, but the view of the city skyline in the distance made up for it. Sunlight streamed in, catching dust in the air like tiny, floating stars. She imagined fairy lights, houseplants, maybe a bookshelf near the window. A space she could make hers. There was only one strange detail, a narrow section of wall in the bedroom that looked different. The paint there seemed newer. The texture was smoother, almost like someone had patched it recently. She made a mental note to ask about it later, then turned her focus back to unpacking. By evening, she had set up most of her things. Clothes in the closet, coffee mugs in the kitchen, her laptop and drawing tablet on the desk by the window. She made a cup of tea, curled up on the couch, and watched the sky darken into a violet-blue canvas. Despite the strange vibe, she told herself she was lucky to have found a place at all. The city was tough. People said it could chew you up and spit you out. But she was determined to make it work. No matter what. At around midnight, just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it for the first time. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, slow, measured. Her eyes flew open. She held her breath, staring at the ceiling. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from the wall behind her bed, the one that shared a border with the locked storage room. Emma sat up, heart thudding. She waited. The sound stopped. No more knocking. No footsteps, no voices. Just silence. Maybe it was the pipes, she thought, or the old building settling, or something else. She lay back down and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come easily that night, and in the corner of the room, unnoticed, a thin line of dust near the wall had been disturbed, just slightly, like someone had walked through it, from the inside. For the first week, Emma convinced herself it was nothing. Old buildings creaked, walls made noise, and plumbing systems sometimes groaned like they had lungs. But the more time she spent alone in the apartment, the harder it became to explain away the little things, especially the things that moved when she wasn't looking. It started with her phone charger. One morning, she woke up late for work. In a panic, she threw on clothes, grabbed her bag, and reached for her charger, which she always left plugged into the outlet beside her bed. It was gone. Not just unplugged, gone. She searched everywhere. Under the bed, behind the nightstand, in the kitchen, even the bathroom. Frustrated, she grabbed her backup charger from her bag and left for work, muttering to herself about how she really needed to organize better. That evening, after a long, rainy commute, she came home soaked and tired. She tossed her keys on the counter, opened the fridge to grab a drink, and froze. Her charger was sitting on the middle shelf, right between a container of leftover noodles and a half-empty bottle of orange juice. She stared at it, cold water dripping from her coat, the fridge light casting a pale glow on the white cord. It hadn't been there that morning. She hadn't even opened the fridge during her search. She didn't drink orange juice. Emma picked up the charger slowly, like it might burn her fingers. Then, laughing nervously, she shook her head and said aloud, "Okay, I'm clearly losing it." But a part of her, a deep, quiet part, knew she wasn't. The second incident happened 3 days later. She was brushing her teeth, late at night when she caught something strange in the mirror. A blur, a flicker of movement behind her. She turned quickly, foam still in her mouth. Nothing. But the bathroom door, which she was sure had been half closed, was now wide open. She stood there, staring at it, the toothbrush still in hand, her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs. Then, just as she leaned forward to spit into the sink, the bathroom light flickered once, twice, then went out. She stood in darkness, breath caught in her throat, listening to the silence pressing in around her. Then came a sound, faint but unmistakable, a soft giggle, childlike, playful, from just outside the bathroom door. She dropped the toothbrush and slammed the door shut, flicking the light back on with trembling fingers. It blinked to life again, steady this time. The room was empty. But when she turned back to the mirror, she saw something that made her stomach twist, a small, smudgy handprint. On the glass, right next to where her own reflection stood. Over the following days, the atmosphere in the apartment grew heavier, like the air was thickening around her. There were cold spots that appeared without reason, sharp, unnatural drops in temperature, that made her breath fog up even when the windows were closed. Lights dimmed without warning. Shadows seemed longer, darker, less willing to behave. She tried to ignore it, to tell herself she was just stressed. She even downloaded a meditation app and burned some sage from a little metaphysical shop down the block. For a while, it helped. The apartment felt lighter. But then came the mirror incident. It was past midnight when Emma woke from a restless sleep. Her room was cold, colder than it had ever been. Her skin prickled as she sat up. Something felt off. The mirror on her dresser was fogged, like someone had breathed heavily on it. She stood slowly and stepped toward it. Then, as if drawn by invisible fingers, words began to form in the fog. Deliberate, slow, one letter at a time. Me out, Emma gasped and stumbled back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. She fell to the floor with a thud, eyes wide, staring as the letters slowly faded from the glass. She scrambled out of the room and pounded on her neighbor's door, panic clawing at her chest. Mrs. Chen answered, eyes heavy with sleep, her robe pulled tightly around her. She was in her 60s, kind and quiet, always watering her plants in the hallway. Emma explained everything. Well, most of it. The noise, the fog, the message. Mrs. Chen listened carefully, then looked down the hallway toward Emma's apartment, and sighed. "I've lived here a long time," she said softly. "Things happen in this building, especially on your side." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "What kind of things?" Mrs. Chen hesitated. "The kind that never quite leave." Emma didn't sleep that night. She stayed on the couch, every light on, her eyes flicking toward shadows that seemed to stretch a little too far. She thought about calling someone. Her sister, the landlord, the police. But what would she say? "There's something wrong with the walls? My mirror wrote a message on its own? A child is giggling in my bathroom?" They'd send someone in a white coat, so instead, she stayed silent and waited for morning. And as the sun rose, casting a warm gold over the wooden floorboards, she noticed something strange beneath the bed. A trail of tiny, dusty footprints, child-sized, leading from the far wall toward her nightstand. Emma stood there, frozen, her skin crawling. Then she looked up and noticed for the first time a faint outline in the wall near the floor, a square, just a little too perfect. Like a door that had been covered up, a door someone didn't want found. Emma couldn't stop staring at the wall. The faint square outline near the floor of her bedroom looked almost innocent, like a faded patch of drywall no one had noticed in years. But now, under the morning light, it was clear. This wasn't just bad paintwork. It was a door. A small, hidden one, covered up with careful hands and just enough plaster to blend in, at least to the untrained eye. But Emma saw it now, and she couldn't unsee it. She ran her fingers along the edges. The texture here was smoother than the surrounding wall, and the color just slightly off, as if someone had painted over it in a hurry. Her fingernail caught on a tiny crack at the bottom, like a seam. Her heart was racing, but she didn't know why. She could have ignored it, told herself it was nothing, called the landlord even, but something deep inside her whispered otherwise. This was connected to the knocking, the mirror, the footprints. Emma went to her kitchen drawer and pulled out the small worn screwdriver she kept for hanging art and fixing squeaky cabinet doors. She crouched beside the wall and gently pried at the crack. Dust fell. The plaster flaked away with surprising ease, revealing a thin wooden panel behind it, aged, brittle, and slightly warped by time. She hesitated. What was she doing? She was a rational person. She had work to do, deadlines to meet, groceries to buy. She wasn't a ghost hunter. She wasn't this. And yet her hand moved on its own. With a final tug, the panel popped loose, revealing a narrow crawl space behind it, just wide enough for someone to slide through. The air that rushed out was cold and stale, thick with dust and something else. Something metallic, like rust, or dried blood. She leaned in and shined her phone's flashlight inside. The crawl space stretched no more than 5 feet before ending. At another door, this one made of old, cracked wood, with a tarnished brass knob that gleamed faintly in the light. It looked ancient, forgotten, like it belonged in a different century. Emma's throat felt dry. Her body screamed for her to close the panel and walk away. Instead, she pulled a scarf over her mouth, grabbed a flashlight, and crawled inside. The space was tight and claustrophobic. Dust clung to her clothes and cobwebs brushed her face. Every inch forward was an effort. The silence was absolute. No traffic outside, no humming from the fridge, no neighbor's footsteps. Just the sound of her own breathing and the faint creak of the wooden boards beneath her knees. When she reached the door, she paused, heart pounding in her ears. There was no lock, no keyhole, just a knob. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. The wood groaned as the door swung open, and what lay beyond was a room. A small, forgotten room hidden between the walls. It was dimly lit by a single swaying bulb hanging from the ceiling, coated in dust. The floor was bare except for a thin, torn rug. On one side, there was a tiny child's bed. Its metal frame rusted, the mattress stained and sagging. A once white blanket, now yellowed with time, was draped across it like a shroud. Scattered across the floor were toys. Old-fashioned ones, a wooden train with peeling paint, a spinning top, a teddy bear missing one eye, a doll with tangled blonde hair, her porcelain face cracked right down the center. Emma stepped inside, barely breathing. The air was so cold it burned her lungs. Her flashlight caught something on the far wall. Writing, in red crayon, scrawled letters, jagged and uneven, like a child's hand had pressed too hard. I'm still here. Emma stumbled backward, bumping into the edge of the bed. The mattress shifted with a dry, papery sound. Her flashlight flickered. For a split second, she thought she saw something in the corner. A small shape, curled up, watching her. She blinked, and it was gone. Just shadows. Just her imagination. Right? She turned to leave. But something stopped her. Near the door, there was a small wooden box. She picked it up with shaking hands. It was heavy with dust, sealed shut with a rusted latch. She opened it carefully. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, childlike scribbles on faded paper, a little girl with long hair, a tall man with no face, a house with no windows, a red door, a pair of eyes in the dark. At the very bottom was a torn photograph, blurry, stained, but still intact. A man in a suit, a woman in a blue dress, and between them a little girl holding a doll, the same doll now lying on the floor behind her. Written on the back of the photo, in a child's uneven handwriting, were the words, "Me and Mommy and Daddy before he got mean." Emma's hands went numb. Her breath caught in her throat. She dropped the photo and backed away. Suddenly, a soft creak echoed from behind her. The doll, which had been lying still moments ago, had fallen onto its side, and the spinning top, dusty, unmoved for decades, began to spin. Slowly. On its own. Emma scrambled back through the crawl space, pulling herself into her bedroom and slamming. The panel shut behind her. She sat on the floor, gasping, covered in dust and fear. She didn't know what she had just walked into, but she knew one thing for certain. Someone had lived in that room. A child. Forgotten. Trapped. Alone. And whatever had happened, it hadn't been an accident. Something terrible had been hidden, behind her wall, and it wasn't done revealing itself. Emma didn't leave the apartment for 2 days. She called in sick, turned off her phone, and kept the lights on. All of them. Every lamp, every overhead bulb, even the string lights she hadn't meant to unpack yet. The glow of them surrounded her like a fragile shield. She told herself the lights would keep the shadows at bay, that as long as nothing touched the dark, nothing could reach her. But even then, the apartment felt cold. Not a normal cold, like weather, but a deep, bone-rooted chill that no blanket or heater could fix. The kind of cold that feels watched. She kept the box of drawings close. It sat on her kitchen table like a grim centerpiece, its contents spread out in cautious piles. Each picture told its own story, drawn in crayon with heavy, desperate lines. Some were sweet. Flowers, clouds, a smiling sun with long lashes. But most were darker, bleak, frantic. One showed a stick figure girl standing behind a wall, while taller figures laughed outside. Another had the word "No" written over and over, circling a man's looming shadow. But one image made Emma stop breathing altogether. It was a crude sketch of her own bedroom. The window, the bed, the mirror, and in the corner, nearly hidden, was a small pair of eyes, peeking out from inside the wall. That night, sleep didn't come. Emma lay in bed, eyes wide open, the blankets clutched up to her chin. Every noise made her flinch. The creak of the building, the groan of old pipes, the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. But around 3 a.m., something changed. The air shifted. The silence deepened. Then, slowly, the mirror fogged over. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. This time, the message came in quickly, scrawled as if by an invisible hand. "Please, help me." Emma sat up, trembling. Then, suddenly, she felt it. A presence. Not a person, not a physical thing, but a pressure in the room, like the air had thickened with grief, pain, and longing. She whispered, "Who are you?" A sound came from behind, the wall. A soft shuffling, like fabric dragging across floorboards. Then, 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Emma's blood turned to ice. She reached for her phone, hands shaking, and typed the name she remembered from the back of the photo. Lucy. She didn't know what she expected. A record? A news article? Nothing? But, to her surprise, the name Lucy O'Connor brought up a handful of results. Local stories from the late 1990s. One headline stood out: 7-year-old girl goes missing in Eastwood Apartments. Search fails to turn up leads. Emma clicked. The article. It was a short piece, vague, unsettling. Lucy had been reported missing by her father, Harold O'Connor. Her mother had died 2 years prior, and the man had been described by neighbors as quiet but strange, someone who rarely left the apartment. No signs of forced entry, no known suspects. The case went cold. The apartment number listed? 3A, the locked storage room next to Emma's. Her stomach turned. Mr. O'Connor, the landlord, wasn't just a stranger. He was the brother of the man who had lived next door. And Lucy, the girl in the wall, had been his niece. The next morning, Emma went to the landlord's apartment on the ground floor. She knocked, her hand still trembling from the night before. He opened the door slowly, blinking behind his thick glasses. "I need to talk to you," Emma said, her voice dry and cracked. "It's about the storage room." He stiffened. "Told you before. It's nothing. Just old junk." Emma stepped closer, her voice low. "I know what's behind the wall. I found the hidden room, the drawings, the bed." His face turned white. She pressed on. "She's still here, Mr. O'Connor. She never left." He lowered his eyes and, for a long moment, said nothing. Then he stepped back and gestured for her to come inside. The inside of his apartment was neat. Too neat. Everything in its place, dusted, polished, untouched. The kind of clean that spoke of guilt, not order. He sat down slowly, hands trembling as he poured himself a glass of water. "My brother, Harold. He wasn't right after his wife died. Said the world was dangerous. Said people were evil. Started talking about protecting Lucy, that she needed to be hidden. Safe." Emma sat across from him, heart pounding. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Not at first. I just thought he was grieving. Then I heard things, crying, scratching. But when I confronted him, he swore it was the building. He said I was hearing rats. One day, I came to visit, and she was gone." His voice broke. "I didn't know what to do. The police searched, but there was no trace. Harold told them she ran away. They believed him." Emma clenched her fists. "But you knew." He nodded. "I knew, and I didn't speak up." She looked at him for a long time. "She's still trapped in there, waiting." His eyes filled with tears. "Then it's time we set her free." That evening, they reopened the sealed crawlspace together. Emma brought the drawings, a flashlight, and a small lantern. Mr. O'Connor brought an old photo of Lucy from a dusty envelope, one she hadn't seen before. In it, Lucy was smiling, her face full of life. Hopeful. Real. Inside the hidden room, everything was just as she'd left it. The air was cold, but still. The bulb still flickered weakly. Emma laid the photo on the bed, alongside the doll, and spinning top. She whispered, "We're sorry. We know what happened to you. You didn't deserve this." Mr. O'Connor stepped forward, voice quivering. "I failed you, but I remember you, Lucy. You weren't invisible. You weren't forgotten." A wind stirred through the room, gentle, like a sigh. The bulb steadied. The shadows softened. Then, on the wall, a new message appeared, written not in crayon but in condensation, like breath on glass. "Thank you." Emma's eyes filled with tears. The cold lifted. The room felt lighter, like something had finally let go. That night, Emma slept through till morning for the first time in weeks. She dreamed of a little girl with blonde hair, standing in the sunlight, holding a doll in one hand and a drawing in the other. She looked up, smiled, and walked into the light. Emma couldn't go back to normal, not yet, even after the hidden room was exposed, even after Lucy's presence seemed to fade into peace. There were still unanswered questions that gnawed at her. The pieces didn't quite fit together. She had freed a spirit, yes, but the shadow that had left Lucy behind, that had kept her locked away, that had not yet come into the light. And Emma knew one thing. If she didn't understand the full story, it could happen again. So she went, searching for truth. She started with public records, library archives, old newspaper clippings, death certificates. She visited the City Hall's records office where the clerk raised an eyebrow at her request but handed over a yellowed folder, marked O'Connor Herald, 1999. Inside was a copy of the original missing persons report. It had a brief statement from Harold O'Connor, cold and mechanical. I awoke and found my daughter's bed empty. I believe she ran away in the night. She's always been a difficult child, possibly confused, possibly unstable. Emma's hands curled into fists. He blamed her. Even after locking her away, he tried to erase her, rewrite her as troubled, not trapped, imaginary, not imprisoned. She kept reading. A second document, filed months later, was a psychological evaluation. Harold had been quietly committed to a psychiatric facility in upstate New York in 2001, 2 years after Lucy's disappearance. The reason? Paranoid delusions, isolationist behavior, violent outbursts. There was a scribbled note from a staff psychiatrist. Patient claims his daughter's spirit remains in the walls, watching. He believes she is still alive, but in another form. Displays remorse and guilt intermittently, but often reverts to denial. Emma felt a chill race down her spine. Harold hadn't forgotten Lucy. He was haunted by her. She drove 3 hours, north the next day, to the facility where Harold had been admitted. It was still standing, now a half-empty elder care hospital. The receptionist looked surprised when Emma mentioned Harold's name. He passed away 4 years ago, she said, checking a file. Complications from pneumonia. Lived here for nearly 2 decades. Kept mostly to himself. Emma hesitated. Was he violent? The woman nodded slowly. Sometimes, but mostly toward himself. He would cry at night, talk to the walls. One time, a nurse said she heard him whispering to someone, asking for forgiveness, saying she wouldn't stop crying. I just wanted her to be quiet. Emma's throat tightened. What happened to his belongings? She asked. They were boxed up, transferred to his next of kin. Emma blinked. Mr. O'Connor, the landlord, his brother, the receptionist nodded. Yes. I remember he picked up the box himself. Quiet man. Shook my hand and said, "Let the past rest." Emma returned to the apartment that night with a storm building behind her eyes. Mr. O'Connor had helped her. But he had also hidden the truth for years. Had protected his brother's secret. She knocked on his door again, this time firmer. There was a pause. Then the door opened. He looked older than she remembered. Tired, like the weight of what they had uncovered had aged him overnight. I need to know everything, she said quietly. He let her in without a word. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Mr. O'Connor began to speak. I didn't know at first. When Lucy vanished, Harold told me she'd run away. I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to. We both lost people. His wife, my sister-in-law. After she died, he changed, closed himself off, grew paranoid. He looked away. I didn't visit for a while. When I came back months later, the apartment was cold, empty. He wouldn't let me near the second room, said it was storage. Emma's voice was low. You heard her, didn't you? He nodded. Once. A soft crying through the wall. I asked him about it. He slammed the door in my face. He closed his eyes. I wanted to believe he was just grieving, but deep down, I knew. I should have done something. I should have saved her. Emma didn't respond. There was nothing she could say that he hadn't already lived with for decades. Instead, she asked, why seal the room? Why not tell the truth? He looked up, and the answer was written across his face. Shame. I thought maybe, if no one knew, it wouldn't be real. That I could protect her memory. That I could protect myself. Emma stood, her voice quiet but firm. She didn't need protection from the world. She needed protection from him. And from your silence. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I know. That night, as Emma returned to her apartment, the building felt different. Not threatening, not cold, just heavy, like something had shifted, like the walls had exhaled after holding a secret for too long. She stood in front of the mirror, half expecting to see more fog, more writing, but there was none. Only her own reflection. Then, as she turned to leave the room, she saw something, tucked beneath her pillow. A drawing, one she hadn't seen before. It showed a little girl holding a woman's hand. Emma's hand. They stood outside a house with the sun shining and flowers blooming. The girl smiled. Her doll dangled from her arm. At the bottom, in red crayon, were 3 simple words. You heard me. Emma sat down on the bed, the drawing clutched in her hands, and for the first time in weeks, she wept. Not from fear, but from release. The next morning, the apartment was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not just silent, but still. Peaceful. Like something buried had finally been acknowledged. Like the walls had stopped whispering. Emma stood in the doorway of her bedroom, staring at the small square panel she had pried open days ago. The crawl space behind it was still exposed. The air no longer rushed out cold, but it carried a faint scent now. Lavender and old books. Like the memory of a little girl still clinging to the corners of the space she once called home. The drawing from the night before still lay on the bed. You heard me. Those 3 words echoed in Emma's mind like a bell. Not accusing, not mournful, just grateful. And underneath it all, a quiet plea she could still feel in her bones. Let me go. Emma knew what she had to do. That afternoon, she returned to the crawlspace one last time. She moved slowly, carefully, carrying a small box she had prepared. Inside were the things she thought Lucy might have wanted to take with her if she'd been allowed to leave. The cracked porcelain doll, now gently cleaned and wrapped in a soft cloth. The drawing of Lucy and her parents, before the fear, before the walls closed in. A paper daisy Emma had folded herself, with petals colored in bright crayon hues. She set the box on the floor of the hidden room, beside the little rusted bed. Then she lit 3 white candles and placed them in a triangle around it. As the flames flickered to life, the air shifted, warmth, not chill, filling the room. I don't know what comes next, Emma whispered, kneeling by the bed. But I hope you find peace. You deserved a life, Lucy. A garden, friends, laughter. Not this, her voice caught in her throat. You were never forgotten, and you're not trapped anymore. The flame of the middle candle flared, then settled. Emma felt it, deep in her chest, a release, a loosening, like something invisible had finally stopped holding its breath. That night, she dreamed again. But it wasn't the usual cold nightmare. No shadowy figures, no fogged mirrors. This time, she was standing in a meadow. Wildflowers swayed in the breeze. The sky was painted in golds and purples, the kind only found in the last moments of day. And in the middle of it all was Lucy, wearing a pale blue dress. Her blonde hair caught the wind as she smiled and ran to Emma, laughing. A real laugh, light and whole and free. She didn't speak. She just reached out and took Emma's hand. Together they walked toward the horizon, hand in hand, until the sunlight washed everything in warmth. Then Emma woke up. Tears were on her face, but she was smiling. The apartment felt lighter after that. No more knocking. No more cold spots. The mirrors stayed clean. The floorboards stopped groaning. Even the birds outside the window seemed to sing louder. Emma stayed. She didn't feel afraid anymore. The space had changed. It was no longer haunted, but healed. Though, sometimes when the light hit just right, she'd see faint fingerprints on the glass, or a crayon, lying on the floor where it hadn't been the night before. Not to scare her, just to say hello. Epilogue. The sound of silence. Weeks passed. Then months. Emma hung one of Lucy's drawings on the wall, framed, centered between two tall plants in her living room. It was the one of the garden. The sun was a heart. The sky was purple. In the middle was a little girl with a crown of flowers and stars in her eyes. Visitors would comment on it sometimes. "Did your niece draw this?" "No," Emma would say softly. "She was just someone who lived here before me." She never explained further. She didn't need to. Some stories are too heavy to retell. Others are too sacred. But sometimes, on quiet nights, she still whispers into the empty apartment, "Sleep well, Lucy." And every so often, from behind the walls, she swears she hears the soft creak of footsteps, fading into peace. Time moved on. But the apartment never fully forgot. Emma lived there for months after Lucy was freed. She painted the walls, replaced the dusty blinds, added soft rugs and scented candles. The cold spots were gone. The shadows stayed in their corners. For the first time since she moved in, the apartment felt like it belonged to her. But every so often she would sense it, the slightest shift in the air. A faint brush across her shoulder when no one was there. A soft giggle when the windows were open and the breeze carried just the right tone. Not frightening, not sad, just familiar. Lucy was gone, yes, but not entirely. One night in early autumn, Emma came home late. Her bag was heavy with groceries and the chill outside had her cheeks pink and her hands aching. She turned the key in the lock and stepped into the apartment, sighing with relief at the warmth that greeted her. She paused. The hallway light was on. She was sure she'd turned it off that morning, and on the floor, just beneath the mirror in the hallway, lay a single crayon, red, broken in half. Emma didn't panic. She didn't feel dread. She smiled. "Hi, Lucy," she whispered softly. The mirror didn't fog. The lights didn't flicker, but there was a faint sense of presence, like someone was standing just behind her, watching with quiet amusement. Emma bent down, picked up the crayon, and placed it in the small wooden box she kept on a shelf in the living room. Lucy's box. Inside were a few of the rescued drawings, the cleaned porcelain doll, and a photo of Lucy's face. Faded, but never forgotten. Sometimes Emma dreamed of Lucy. Not the haunted version, the pale, silent figure in the corner of her room, but the child she might have been, the one who liked purple skies and garden flowers. In the dreams, Lucy would sit beside Emma on the floor, drawing stars and stick figures. She never spoke, but the smile on her face said enough. Emma began leaving little notes around the apartment just for her. One, taped to the fridge, said, "I'm making cookies today." Another in the bookshelf, "Found a new book you'd like." It was silly, she knew, but it made her feel connected, like she hadn't just uncovered a secret, she had gained something too, a friendship beyond time. Then came the day when Emma was dusting the bookshelf and found something strange wedged behind the novels. A new drawing, one she hadn't placed, there. It showed a sunlit room, warm and colorful, with Emma sitting on the floor, and next to her, a girl with blonde hair, smiling, holding her hand. In the drawing, above them, were the words, "Thank you for seeing me." Emma stared at it for a long time. Then she framed it, placed it above her writing desk, and whispered, "You're welcome." Even her neighbors noticed the difference. "Place feels lighter lately," Mrs. Chen said one morning in the hallway. "Used to get this strange pressure in my head near your door, like I couldn't breathe." Emma nodded. "She's free now." Mrs. Chen tilted her head, curious. "Who?" Emma just smiled. Someone who waited a long time to be heard. Seasons passed. Life moved forward. Emma's career flourished and her home grew into a sanctuary of creativity. But she never moved out. Couldn't. The apartment had changed her. It had taught her to listen. To the quiet, to the forgotten, to the stories hidden in walls. Sometimes guests would mention odd things. A child's laugh. A cold draft where there shouldn't be one. Once, a friend swore the porcelain doll on. The shelf winked at them. Emma never explained. She just offered tea and say, "This place has character." And when the lights flickered, she'd glance at the mirror and murmur, "Still here, huh?" No response, just a quiet feeling in the room. A presence. Lingering, but gentle. Some ghosts don't haunt to scare you. Some stay to remind you that they were real. That they mattered. That someone finally listened. Don't just listen. Experience the mystery. If you love spine-tingling tales with a soul, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment if you've ever felt something you can't explain. Share this story with someone who says they don't believe in ghosts. They might change their mind.